Okay. Hi, Dr. Perryman. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm all right. And where am I talking to you at? Where are you right now? What
I'm
state?
lovely home in Arlington, Virginia,
And that
which
is
is
near.
near Washington, D.C.
Very cool. And what is your job right now?
My job,
Yes.
well, I'm a composer,
Yes.
and I'm also an arranger, and I'm also a copyist and an engraver. So I have a lot of jobs that involve uh, making printed music.
Interesting. So an arranger would be someone who takes an existing piece of music and rearranges it to fit certain instruments or voices or whatever you need it to fit, right? So what are
Exactly.
those what are the other things you said?
What was that? I'm sorry.
The other things, the copyist and
Oh,
engraver.
so a copyist or an engraver is somebody who takes a handwritten piece of music from somebody else and they make it look nice. They put it into like a printable form
Hmm,
for publishing.
very cool. And do you do that on the computer or how does
I
that
do
work?
it on the computer.
Very cool. I didn't know
Yeah,
you did that. And you have your doctorate from West Virginia University.
I do. Yep. It's called a
Yay.
Doctor of Musical Arts.
Awesome. And how long did it take you to get that?
It took a really long time. It took me 3 years of classes, and then I did another 2 years of writing a dissertation and completing a composition portfolio.
Wow. So you had to make a lot of compositions to graduate then, right?
I did, yeah. I had to write an orchestra piece, I had to write a choir piece, I had to write all kinds of music.
Wow. So, speaking of, you do write all kinds of music. So, can you give me just a little taste of like what kind of things you write, or just a little idea of maybe what your favorite things are to write?
Yeah, sure. So I love to write music for smaller ensembles, and so we call that chamber music. So that's things like string quartets or brass quintets, where there's a smaller group of people. And I like to do that more than I like orchestra music because I think, well, first of all, you get it performed more often, but it's also really cool, I think, to have that kind of connection with people rather than just like sitting back in the hall and seeing like a big orchestra sound. I think it's kind of cooler to feel like you're in the same room with the performers. Like I think there's more of a connection that you can have with a smaller group of people.
Very cool. And so,
Yeah.
so I know you said you wrote choir pieces. Do you prefer to write instrumental or choir or both? How does that work for you?
I never thought I would write a lot of choir music because I sang in like church choir when I was younger, but I never really trained as a singer. But the work that I tend to be getting now is choir music in a lot of cases. So I do a lot of arranging for choir and a lot of writing for choir. So I do write for that too.
Very cool. Okay, so I have a list of questions from my students
Okay.
and maybe even myself
Okay.
about why do you do what you do?
That's a really good question. I was, yeah, I've given this some thought, in my career, and it's hard to come up with a good answer, I guess. But I mean, I could tell you like when I was younger, I really loved movie music, and I really loved
Who
video game music.
doesn't?
Those were like my favorite things ever. And so I was always trying to figure out what I liked about the video game music I liked, what I liked about the movie music I liked, and so I started to figure out the sounds and how to play them on the piano, and figured out how I could write them down, and it just kind of went from there. And when I got to school, I didn't, it's tough to break into those businesses, writing music for movies and video games. So I don't really do that very much right now. But it is something that I always think about when I'm writing. And as far as like why I write music now, I've always wanted to create things that I've wanted to hear. So maybe it's because I'm really I don't know if critical is the right word, but when I listen to the radio, I enjoy listening to things, you know, on the radio, and I love hearing them the first time. But I'm always thinking about, oh, well, what would I have done differently? What would I improve so that's one thing that makes me want to write music, is trying to create things that I want to hear.
Very cool. And the kids may not know this because I haven't told them, but you love to play the banjo.
I do.
Yes. And there are other instruments that you play as well. So what other instruments do you play?
I play piano. That was my very first instrument.
Mm-hmm.
I play the viola, which is, as your kids probably know, it's like a bigger violin.
Hopefully they know that.
Yep. I played the trombone in high school too. I play, let's see, that might be it actually. I play a little guitar too. So I like, keyboard instruments and string instruments mostly what I play.
Those are the best.
Yeah, that's true. It's true.
And I say that because my husband plays horn and I love string instruments. So
yeah.
So do you have a favorite style of music maybe you listen to on the radio? Or do you like to listen to still movie soundtracks and things like that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I love everything. I know everyone says that, but I love, since I play banjo, I do love bluegrass music. That's never gonna change. I love what's called contemporary classical music, which is stuff that doesn't get played on the radio very much, but
maybe on NPR.
Yeah, exactly. I love classical music. I still love movie soundtracks. I mean, can't beat Star Wars scores, I love video game music too, still, So those, I like a lot of different things. And when I listen to things, I try to figure out what I like about it and try to take that and put it into my own writing.
And that's not stealing, it's just borrowing from others, right?
Exactly.
Yes, we have that discussion a lot in music class about borrowing and how it's a nice thing because it means you love someone else's work.
Absolutely. Yep.
Okay, so when you actually sit down to write a piece of music, what is your process, or do you kind of do it differently every time?
Well, I used to sit down at the computer and write everything into the computer. So I used a program called Finale, which is kind of like the Microsoft Word of music notation. So you can play it on your keyboard and it will pop up on the screen, and then you can turn that into printed music. I used to do that a lot. I started using another program called Pro Tools to do a lot of things, and Pro Tools is it's called an audio tracking program, and it's you have multiple tracks and you can record the sound directly into those tracks and play it back all together. That's a really useful thing. And most recently, I've been going back old school and handwriting things with paper and pencil and piano. So I've kind of, changing the way I approach it a lot. And, it's sort of, and not different every time, but I think it's a little bit more of a different experience when you're writing things. I think you have to think about it a little bit more.
Right,
than
you have to.
When you're just putting it in the computer.
You actually have to figure out what the rhythm is instead of just letting the computer do that for you, right?
Exactly, yeah.
That was one of our big problems with our project this year, was we actually had to remember what rhythms were and how to actually write notes. Yeah. And that was a challenge that the kids actually said, most of them said that was their hardest part, was writing the rhythm to their project.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
And that is difficult.
Yeah.
So do you get an idea first? You have some kind of theme or motif that you hear in your head and then you write it down, or do you just have this big grand scheme that you work towards? Or with choir music, do you write the words first and then the music? How does that work for you?
Yeah, well, I've never been good at writing words, I will confess. It's just something I've never really been good at. So if I'm going to do something that involves words, I'll either find a text that is what's called public domain, where nobody owns the rights to it.
Right.
Or I'll get a friend to write something, or, I'll approach it that way. As far as music, I like to improvise a lot on the piano. So if I'm trying to come up with an idea, I'll just sort of sit there and play, and then I'll try to remember what I did and write that down. Other times I get really lucky and an idea will come to me, like when I'm asleep or something. So I have a little notebook by my bed that I'll write an idea down. Um, so it's kind of, you kind of do whatever you can to get it. Like sometimes you'll get lucky and it'll just happen, and other times
Right.
you have to sit down and work at it. So
And how do you know exactly what to write? Do you know like the instrumentation already? What instruments you're going to put with it, or maybe it's just one instrument by itself? How do you know what to do?
yeah, I think a lot of writing music happens when you're not actually writing it. So one of the questions my teacher asked me before he accepted me into his program was, do you think about your compositions while you're not working on them? Like, are you thinking about them when you're driving in the car, or are you thinking about them when you're doing your chores or something? It's like, and fortunately, I had the right answer, which was yes. And so I think a lot of it is thinking about, well, what would it be like to write a string quartet piece? And you're not necessarily thinking about what melody would I have? You're more thinking about what would the sound be like, and how can I change the sound to be unique? Or, yeah, so I think a lot of it is just coming up with kind of a bigger plan first.
Mm-hmm.
And then from there, you kind of break it down into the different parts, you know. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Very good. And after you finish a piece, do you ever hear it like played by a group or maybe a choir, and you think, oh, I really don't like how that sounds, or I really wish I could change that? Does that ever happen?
Oh yeah, like all the time. It's because you don't really know what things are going to sound like until somebody plays it or sings it. And that's kind of I think that's one of the most difficult things about being a composer, because you can come up with all these plans and you can write everything perfectly, but you never know how someone else is going to interpret your music. And I had something a couple years ago. I ended up like winning this contest for an a cappella group in DC, and I remember I wrote the score. It was like exactly what I wanted, and then when they performed it, like the way they approached which sections were loud and which sections were quiet, and the dynamics and everything. The way they approached it was like completely the opposite of what I wanted. And at first I was kind of like, oh, well, that's pretty lame that they changed it, and sort of upset about it. But then I thought, oh, well, it actually worked the way they did it. So I'd rather it be, sound good than be exactly what I wanted. So I think when you're writing music, you have to be open to how other people are going to interpret it. You have to be open to a collaboration, I think.
That's really cool. So this brings me to another question I wasn't going to ask yet, but so how do you feel when you get feedback and it's not always positive?
Yeah, I mean, it always hurts your feelings at first, right? But then you have to really be objective about it, or I guess maybe the real word is a grown up about it, and just think, like, oh, well, they're only really saying that because they want it to be, they want you to do your best, right? So I don't think anybody who would come up and say that to you is doing it to hurt your feelings, or like to make you feel bad about something. It's just the experience that they had, and I think that that's great. And I think that when I get feedback like that, I take it and I really think about it, and I decide if they were right or wrong. And usually they are right, in some way. And you don't necessarily want to change what you're doing, because you want to have your own approach to things. You don't want to like always be beholden to what other people say about your work. But I think you definitely do have to consider the connection that you're having with an audience, and that their experience is going to be way different than what you experience it, because you know the music so well.
Right.
So to answer your question, it hurts, but it is really useful to get negative feedback.
Change it to fit their ideas, and sometimes you think that maybe they thought what they heard was good, or maybe they thought that you wouldn't change it as the composer. So you just kind of take it sometimes, and other times you just let it go, right?
Yep, exactly. And you have to be really honest with yourself too. You have to think, you know, are they right? You can't just say, well, that's what I wrote, so I'm definitely right. You know, like you have to be really honest with yourself, I think, to grow.
Very cool.
Yeah.
So, what's the hardest part of writing music?
Well, I think the hardest part for me is the discipline it takes to actually do it every day because I love it personally, but it is a lot of work to sit down and make yourself do it for like 2 hours or something a day. And in some ways that's similar to like being a pianist or being a a performer where you have to practice every day. But it's even worse because you don't really get the benefit of all that work until like way later, until like maybe a year from when you're sitting down and writing it. Because you spend all this time, figuring out the notes, and then you're not going to really hear what it sounds like until it's performed, which might be years and years later. So it's really, really tough to be okay with that process where things are not gonna, you don't have like instant gratification. It's like it's going to be a while until all the payoff happens for all the work you're doing. I think that's the toughest part about it.
That would be very tough.
Yeah.
Because we are an instant gratification society.
Yeah.
It's hard
exactly.
to hold on to that work that you love and not know really what it sounds like or not be able to share it with the world right away.
Yeah.
That's tough. So one last question, and then I'm going to just let you talk to the kids for a minute. But how do you feel like, or how do you stay relevant in our society today? How do you feel like your music is relevant, maybe?
Yeah, I think it's a good question, too. I guess it depends on what you mean by being relevant. It's like, I hate to, like, redefine a question or whatever, but I can think of different meanings for that, where are you being relevant to what everybody else wants you to do, and you're writing things that you think people want to hear. I mean, that's one definition of being relevant, right? Another definition would be, are you writing music that I guess is like socially relevant? Like, are you writing music that applies to the time that we're living in? That's one way of being relevant. And then there's another, like, are you being personally relevant, where are you like writing the music that you want to write? And so I think a lot of it is like self-examination and just deciding what you want to do to make it sound the way you want it to sound, and deciding what relevancy means to you, right? And so the only thing I would say, like, to the best way to stay relevant is, I think, to listen to a lot of music and to listen to things that you like, but also to listen to things that you don't like. So if you don't like hip hop or something, you don't like rap, you should listen to it a lot. You should be able to say what you don't like about it.
Right.
I think that's way more important than being able to say what you do like about it, right? Because I think when you can define what you don't like about it, you might be able to see past that and find something that you do like about it, right? So I think to stay relevant, you just need to listen to a lot of things that you wouldn't necessarily listen to. Go to a lot of concerts, right? See a lot of live music, because live music is way better than listening to stuff that's recorded, I think, because you never know what's going to happen. So that's kind of my thought on that question.
I like that answer. I don't like country music or bluegrass, but I feel like I've listened to enough where I can say what I really do like about it, and what I really don't like about it. And I think we talk about that a lot in music class, especially with classical music or music from around the world, because America is not the only place that has music. And I think sometimes we forget that there's other sounds and other styles around the world, and we have to listen to it to learn to appreciate it, or learn what we don't like or do like about it, and then incorporate it into, our repertoire, if you will, of what we like and don't like.
Yeah.
So, do you have any advice for my aspiring composers or performers, or even my kids who don't really love advice for any of my kiddos?
Yeah, well, I think, you know, writing music is a tough thing, as you guys all found out. Um, but that doesn't mean you can't do it, right? I think approach it this way. One thing I wish I knew when I was really young was how much work it takes to be good at something. So, like, my dad is a really good musician, and he is like really good at a lot of instruments. So he plays guitar, he plays banjo, he plays fiddle, um, and he's really good. And and when I would listen to him play, it would be like my thought when I was really young was, oh, he's just really good. He never practices. Like I've never seen him practice. He's just really good. So when I was like thinking about my own, like trying to get as good as him, I didn't really think I had to work at it, you know? And so I wish when I was younger that someone had sat me down. I wish my dad had said this. I wish he had said, like, you know, I did all this work when I was your age, you know? I spent hours and hours and hours practicing and hours sitting down and listening and just a lot of time, you know, there was a lot of work that went into sounding this good, you know?
Right.
And I think that's true about playing piano. I think that's true about composition. And I think it's true about everything in life. You know, like it takes a lot of work to be good at something. And when you are good at something, it's such a good feeling. But you have to be prepared, I think, to really work hard at that. And composition is a tough life. Being a musician in general is a tough life. And you really if you're going to be serious about it, you really, really, really have to be prepared for all the work that goes into it. So
right. It's not just easy to sit down and write a piece and sell it and make millions of dollars, right?
Yeah, it hasn't happened to me yet. So
not everybody can be John Williams or Hans Zimmer or, you know, the great Beethoven.
Yeah, and they did all the work too, you know.
That's
so
right.
It's like sometimes you have to be prepared for things not to be easy for you, you know, and you know, ultimately it is worth it. I think I would never discourage somebody from being a musician or being a composer because all that work ultimately is worth it because it's like the best job in the world to create something that people are going to hear that comes out of your brain, you know, and
right.
It's new. I think that's amazing and totally worth all the work.
I agree. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Perryman, for taking your time out of your day and telling us about your job. We really, really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Mrs. Johnson, and I hope that your kids enjoyed this, and I really enjoyed talking to them, so thank you.
Thank you.